There are moments in sports that stop time. Not metaphorically. Not in the poetic way that commentators reach for when they want to make a routine highlight sound important. But literally, moments where 50,000 people inside a stadium simultaneously stop breathing. Where the noise disappears. Where everyone in the building looks at the same spot and cannot process what they are seeing. The eighth inning at Dodger Stadium was one of those moments. Because what happened on that field, in front of a sold-out crowd, under the bright California lights, with cameras rolling from every angle, was not supposed to be possible. Not in a professional baseball game. Not in 2025. Not to the most recognizable athlete on the planet. Shohei Ohtani was assaulted. Not bumped. Not jostled in a close play at the plate. Not caught in the kind of incidental contact that happens 100 times a season and gets forgotten by the next morning. Assaulted. By 3 Cleveland Guardians players. At the same time. The benches cleared. The bullpens emptied. Security flooded the field. And for several minutes that felt like hours, Dodger Stadium descended into the kind of chaos that nobody who was inside that building will ever forget. By the time the dust settled, ejections had been handed out, statements were being demanded from the league, and the baseball world was asking the same question in 100 different languages. How did this happen? And what happens now? This is that story. From the beginning. To understand why the eighth inning exploded the way it did, you have to go back further than most people are willing to go. Because brawls in baseball, real ones, not the slow-moving shoving matches that end with players being held back by teammates, do not happen without a build-up. There is always a history. Always a tension that has been accumulating quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface of the game itself. The Dodgers and the Guardians came into this game carrying something. It wasn't loud. It wasn't plastered across headlines in the days leading up to the matchup. But inside both clubhouses, among the players who pay attention to these things, there was an awareness that the previous encounters between these two teams had left unfinished business. Small moments of friction that were never fully resolved. Words exchanged in passing that landed harder than they were meant to. The kind of inter-team history that lives in the memory of players long after the box scores have been archived and forgotten. Add to that the specific pressure of this particular game. The stakes were real. The Dodgers needed this win. The Guardians were not going to hand it to them. And as the game progressed deep into the later innings, tight, tense, every pitch carrying enormous weight, the atmosphere inside Dodger Stadium had been building towards something without anyone being able to name exactly what that something was. Players on both benches were aware of it. Managers were aware of it. Even the umpires, who had already navigated a difficult game full of close calls and rising frustration, were aware that the temperature on that field was dangerously high. And then Ohtani stepped to the plate in the eighth inning. The sequence of events that led to the brawl happened fast. Faster than most people watching in real time could fully process. Ohtani came to bat with the game hanging in the balance. Everything about his approach was the same as it always is, calm, focused, unhurried. The kind of presence at the plate that makes pitchers uncomfortable before a single pitch is thrown. He took his stance. He looked out at the mound. And the first pitch came in. The movement was deliberate. Directed. And before anyone on the Dodgers bench fully understood what they were watching, 2 more Guardians players were involved. 3 against 1. In the eighth inning of a professional baseball game. In front of 50,000 people. The crowd reaction was unlike anything Dodger Stadium has produced in recent memory. Not the roar of a walk-off home run. Not the collective groan of a devastating loss. Something different. Something primal. The sound of tens of thousands of people simultaneously processing something that their brains were telling them should not be happening. Dodgers players came off that bench like a wave. There was no hesitation, no waiting to see how the situation developed. When your best player, when Shohei Ohtani, is in the middle of something like that, you move. Every player in that dugout moved at the same time. The field became chaos within seconds. What unfolded on that field over the next several minutes was the most serious on-field incident Major League Baseball has seen in years. This was not the theatrical pushing and chest-bumping that characterizes most baseball brawls, the ones that look dramatic on highlight reels but rarely result in anyone actually getting hurt. The ones where players from both teams spend most of their energy holding each other back rather than making contact. This was different from the very first moment. Security personnel who were positioned around the field during the game later described the speed at which the situation escalated as genuinely alarming. By the time they reached the center of the incident, multiple players were already involved and the physical confrontation had gone well beyond what standard field security protocols are designed to manage. The bullpens emptied from both sides almost simultaneously. Players who had been warming up, players who had finished their work for the night, players who had no direct involvement in whatever triggered the initial confrontation, all of them were suddenly on the field, moving toward the same place, adding bodies to a situation that was already dangerously out of control. Coaches from both teams were in the middle of it. Managers were on the field. The umpire crew, already under pressure from a difficult night of officiating, found themselves completely unable to restore order through conventional means. The stadium PA system attempted to intervene. Security reinforcements were called from every available position inside the building. And through all of it, the cameras kept rolling, capturing every angle of a scene that was already being transmitted to screens around the world in real time. In Japan, it was the middle of the night. Millions of people woke up to alerts on their phones telling them that something had happened to Ohtani. By the time they opened their screens, the footage was already everywhere. The world was watching. And the world was not happy with what it saw. Through everything, the chaos, the bodies, the noise, the complete breakdown of order on a professional baseball field, the cameras kept finding Ohtani. And what those cameras showed was something that, even in the middle of an extraordinary and disturbing situation, managed to say something profound about who Shohei Ohtani is as a person and as a competitor. He did not retaliate. In the immediate moment, surrounded by chaos, having just been the target of something that had no place on a baseball field, Ohtani's response was controlled in a way that should not have been humanly possible. Players who were standing near him in those first seconds later described the expression on his face not as fear, not as rage, but as something closer to disbelief. The look of a man who has dedicated his entire life to the purity of competition suddenly confronted with something that had nothing to do with competition at all. His teammates formed a wall around him almost immediately. The Dodgers players who reached him first made it their singular priority to ensure that nothing further happened to their teammate. That protective instinct, that immediate, unspoken commitment to stand between Ohtani and whatever came next, said everything about the bond inside that clubhouse. But the images of Ohtani in those moments circulated globally within minutes. Every major sports outlet, every baseball platform, every social media account dedicated to the sport had the same footage on their front page. The most famous baseball player on earth, in the middle of a scene that should never have involved him. The reaction from around the baseball world was immediate, unified, and furious. When order was finally restored on that field, the damage assessment began. Multiple ejections were handed out by the umpire crew, players from both sides, though the distribution of those ejections and the reasoning behind each one became its own controversy almost immediately. Questions were raised about whether the officiating crew had correctly identified the individuals responsible for initiating the confrontation. Whether the ejections reflected what the footage actually showed. Whether the players most responsible for what happened were among those sent to the clubhouse or whether some of them remained on the field. These questions did not stay inside the stadium. They went directly to MLB's offices, carried there by the Dodgers organization, which wasted absolutely no time in making its position known. The statement from the Dodgers front office was measured in its language but unmistakable in its intent. They were demanding a full review. They were demanding that the footage be examined completely. They were demanding accountability, not in the vague, institutional sense that leagues default to when they want to appear serious without committing to anything specific, but real, documented, consequential accountability for every individual whose actions on that field crossed a line that professional baseball cannot allow to be crossed. The Guardians organization, for their part, issued a statement acknowledging that the situation had escalated beyond acceptable boundaries and that they were cooperating fully with the league's review process. Whether that cooperation would prove sufficient in the face of what the footage showed remained to be seen. MLB announced an immediate investigation. Formal review of all available footage. Interviews with players, coaches, and officiating personnel. A process that league officials promised would be thorough, transparent, and, critically, swift. The baseball world was not in a patient mood. There is a version of this story that gets filed away as an ugly incident and eventually forgotten, absorbed into the long history of baseball controversies that flare up intensely and then fade as the season moves on and new stories take their place. This is not that version. What happened in the eighth inning at Dodger Stadium touched something that goes far beyond the normal boundaries of a sports controversy. Because the player at the center of it is not simply a very good baseball player having a very bad night. Shohei Ohtani is the single most important active athlete in the sport. He is the reason millions of people around the world, people who had never previously cared about American baseball, now follow the Dodgers religiously. He is the living argument for what baseball can be when it operates at its absolute highest level. When something happens to Ohtani, it does not stay inside the sports pages. It becomes a global story with implications that reach far beyond batting averages and standings. The international response to this incident, particularly from Japan, has already created pressure on MLB that the league cannot simply manage with a carefully worded statement and a standard disciplinary process. The Japanese sports media, the Japanese public, the institutions and corporations whose association with Ohtani carries enormous cultural and financial significance, they are all watching. They are all waiting to see how American professional baseball responds to what happened to their most beloved active athlete. The league understands what is at stake. The response to this incident will say something lasting about what kind of institution Major League Baseball is. About whether its stated commitments to player safety and competitive integrity mean anything when the situation demands real consequences rather than symbolic gestures. Every player in that league is watching to see what those consequences look like. The eighth inning at Dodger Stadium will be talked about for a very long time. Not because of what it means for the standings. Not because of how it affects the Dodgers' playoff picture or the Guardians' season. But because of what it revealed, about the tension that can build beneath the surface of a sport, about the fragility of order on a professional field, and about what happens when that order breaks down around the wrong person at the wrong moment. Ohtani will play again. He will step back into that batter's box with the same quiet focus that defines everything about him. He will not carry the anger of this moment into his next at-bat. That is not who he is. But three Guardians players and an entire league now understand something that perhaps they did not fully appreciate before. When you come for Shohei Ohtani, on a baseball field, in front of 50,000 people, with cameras rolling from every angle, the world notices. And the world does not forget.